If you're thinking about moving your best salesperson to a management role, please, please, please don't. It does a couple of things. It frustrates the person, it frustrates the business owner, and it frustrates the team. So you lose that producer, they go to a competitor.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight, and transactions, through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. Welcome back to the Industrial Growth Institute podcast, where guests join me weekly to help unpack various aspects of revenue growth for industrial manufacturers. And I hope over time, we help to weave those together into kind of a coherent understanding of a truly systemic approach to revenue growth, from board governance through strategy, marketing, sales, all the way to customer success. One of the most underrated contributors to consistent growth, I believe, is sales management. It's a topic that often bubbles up here because it's absolutely foundational. Sales management isn't an administrative coordinator kind of a role. Rather, I would argue that it's the fulcrum through which strategy, value propositions, and sales process are actually turned into revenue. Too often, people just view it as some kind of alchemy, but there's really nothing magical about it. It's hard work, it's expertise, but we can understand exactly what's required. And with the right people, we can implement it, we can measure it, and we continuously improve it. And perhaps the purest example of sales management is actually fractional. There's no long-term perspective that you can, put excuses on saying, oh, well, just give us 6 months. Fractionals have to make an impact with the people that are in place in a matter of months. And so joining me today to talk about fractional sales management is a fabulous practitioner of the discipline, Walter Crosby. Walter is the founder and CEO of Helix Sales Development. His programs focus on sales culture, sales positioning, sales processes, sales hiring, and sales leadership. And everything, he believes, flows from the culture that you tolerate. He notes that what really flips his hair back as he works on sales is transforming teams into a high-performance sales organization with a repeatable sales engine. He holds an advanced degree, what he calls from the School of Hard-Won Wisdom in New York City, as well as an undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan. He's a published author of the book, Scale Your Sales, Avoid the 7 Critical Mistakes CEOs Make. And he's a podcast host. Those who kind of know him through his podcast know him in his studio, reflecting over a fine cigar. He calls it his lounge as well as his office. And you'll hear more about both of those passions if you tune into his podcast called Sales and Cigars. So with that background, welcome, Walter. Thank you for joining me today.
I appreciate the invitation, Ed.
So you're broadcasting, is that office or private cigar lounge, or what is it?
I'm not sure there's a difference anymore. They sort of mirrored, blended together.
So there's not some whole other comfortable couches on the other side of the camera that we can't see?
Oh, there are. There's 2 big leather chairs. I just used to have more space. Now I got a desk, I got lights, I got the crap that's sitting behind me. I've just sort of taken over. So it's less of a place for my friends to come over and hang out, and more of a oasis where I can do some work, enjoy a cigar, listen to music, watch a movie. I still have the whole system I built. I used to call it the Blue Smoke Lounge.
And what kind of music?
Depends upon the mood. I think music is something that is driven by, for me, it's driven by what I'm feeling and what I need to feel. So often it's jazz. Sometimes it's some old standbys like Billy Joel. My music taste go from Frank Sinatra to Miles Davis and
Can
everything
you
in between.
work while you listen to music?
If I've got music going on and I'm doing heads down work, I'll listen to classical.
Got it.
Something that is not Tchaikovsky, but something that's a little bit more subtle and it can be in the background.
Right.
I can listen to jazz while I got heads down work too.
You don't start thinking about the progressions and the improvisation and get distracted from your work?
No, it occupies part of my brain that is listening to the music, and then I can somehow focus the other side of my brain on the task at hand.
I wish I could do that. I'm envious of people that can listen to music while they work, and for me, it just does not work.
It's I've heard that before. I get it. It's just I don't think I'm enjoying the music the way it was intended. But it's still being processed, and my brain is engaged with it.
Makes sense. Speaking of enjoyment, you've got this cigar passion. How did you become such a cigar enthusiast?
My wife would tell the story that one summer, many moons ago, I developed two bad habits: golf and cigars.
So did you start smoking cigars on the golf course?
Absolutely. Because they're a social thing, right?
Right.
You enjoy them with friends. You enjoy them, when you're, golf is a sport, but it's not exactly football, right? And sometimes it feels like that. But yeah, I'm usually with friends. I'm outdoors. There might be a cocktail involved if you're playing golf. You get all those things, that community aspect of it, and you get to enjoy it, and you have some space, right, to literally enjoy the cigar while you're thinking about your next bad shot.
For anyone in the audience that happens to be familiar with cigars and interested, are you smoking one while we chat today?
I wasn't sure if that was kosher or not. So
of course it is.
There's one sitting close by.
That's part of how you show up. So you're certainly welcome to if that's what you'd like to do. If you have one close by, would anyone recognize the type? What's your mood and what have you selected for today?
I'm struggling with a Rocky Patel that's burning badly, which isn't the norm. I know you don't know much about cigars, but it's a fairly popular cigar. But every once in a while, you get one that canoes, burns badly, and I've been struggling with that one for the last half hour.
Well, I'm actually looking forward to this weekend. My youngest gets married, and that gives me an excuse to actually break out a box of cigars and enjoy one. I like you talk about, I love that social aspect of it. And so when I have a wedding and an occasion to enjoy one, particularly, the special occasion of my son's wedding. So at his request, I bought Padron, what are they, 1926 or something like that?
That's a nice box.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to that.
The problem with that kind of a cigar, right? When you do a wedding, you kind of want to have some of those for the people who will appreciate it,
right?
And then you want to give, the brick house,
right,
or the more pedestrian cigar to the people that don't really understand nor appreciate a $25-$30 cigar.
Well, I think he's buying nice wine for everybody who's showing up, and not everyone's going to appreciate that. We'll be gracious and hope that they can appreciate the experience.
But it'll drive you nuts when you watch them drop it.
Well, so let's talk about business. You're a solo consultant, so you have the choice of who you're going to work with, and I know you set that bar pretty high. You specifically, I think I've seen you describe it as only engaging with growth-minded mid-market CEOs who have the desire and commitment to build a performance-based sales culture. What % of mid-market companies out there would you say fit that profile?
Wow, that's a tough question because not as many as you would think.
I can miss.
Understand that transformation process is going to be bumpy. Understanding that it's going to be uncomfortable for their team. It's going to be uncomfortable for them.
Right.
As an entrepreneur, there are people are going to come to him and say, "Hey, this guy's crazy. He wants us to do things that we've never done before." Um, and it really comes down to, I mean, I will say this to an owner, business owner, that, hey, this, they're all excited. They're ready to sign the agreement, and everybody's excited. I'm like, let me tell you why this won't work. And then they get this like face, sit back in their chair. Like, what do you mean it won't work? Yeah. And then I used to hold up a mirror, right? It's hard to do that virtually now,
Right.
but it they would be like, well, why am why am I the problem? I'm like, because you've been the problem. More often than not, you're part of the problem, and you're brought as somebody. You're looking to bring somebody in to help you, and you're going to fight the change, and your people are going to fight the change. So we got to get that out on the table. And so I think most of the companies love the idea of change and growth, but when it comes into practice, it's like, exercise.
Yeah, I don't think they love the idea of change and growth. I think they love the idea of accurate forecasts and higher revenue, and they actually loathe the idea of change.
You might be right. They like the concept of what it means.
Right.
Uh, but to get to that, just to get to an accurate revenue forecast, they don't even understand what that looks like. And I know
So
I'm being insulting, but
no,
reality.
I mean I agree. So I think we're aligned on a lot of these topics, and I mean part of what I'm hoping you can elucidate. I mean you talked about that process of how you essentially um, almost reverse them in the old Sandler sense, where tell them that you don't think it's going to work for them, you don't think they can do it. Do you have other tools that you use in advance to kind of yank their chain and to test and try to take measure of who you think you can be successful with?
Yeah, the negative reverse is sort of the end, but it's a series of questions that like any good salesperson is going to have a series of discovery questions that they want to cause somebody to think,
Right.
and I want them to think differently. So I'm going to get them to look at their problem from a completely different perspective, and that sort of helps me if they're open to this idea of exploring, um, you know, where the real problem is as opposed to where they think it is.
Right.
That gives us some hope early on. So it's really about the question, to get them to think differently about their sales organization.
And have you ever had anybody at that point say, no, you're probably right, this probably doesn't make sense?
Yeah, 2 out of 5 will choose not to, or I'll choose not to.
Mhm.
That's usually in the last 10 years, that's about the ratio. If you get them to ready to go and you ask that question, or you do the negative reverse, they're
Right.
going to be like, oh, they blame me, and that's fine.
Sure.
But the problem really is in the mirror,
Right.
and they'll get there eventually.
That's, I think, overly optimistic in many cases. But let's talk about the name. So you've got this double helix reference. Where did the name come from, and what exactly does it mean? How does it fit contextually?
So double helix is the sales DNA model, right? Helix is uh, the one piece. It's the spring. So a helix is technically a spring, and the idea to spring forward, to use this momentum, take this coiling, and just kind of jump forward,
Got
because
it.
there's so much work that has to be done, right? To build up the energy so that you can jump forward. And I worked with a group. They were actually a client, and I said, they actually said to me when I started working with them, "Your logo sucks. It's awful." And I'm like, "Well, thank you." Um, and like, how did you get this? I'm like, it was $45 on Fiverr, right? And it was called Blue Smoke Consulting, right? So I mean, it wasn't awful, but it didn't have a look and panache to it. So I'm not sure Helix does, but yeah, that's the idea. It's a little hat tip to science.
But isn't that interesting though, that you instinctively understand so much nuance about sales, and it's clear to you why some sort of a pedestrian approach to sales management or sales training won't work. On the other hand, in this other aspect of your life, you went on Fiverr and paid $45 and got a logo, which somebody with more design and branding savvy would recognize, as a limitation. We're often limited by our what I guess we might call self-limiting assumptions, and that's particularly true in sales.
Yeah, I don't know that it came naturally. I had to learn a lot of things, but design and the branding aspect of it, it took me a while to realize that there was importance there.
Right.
And it's an impression. So my friends at Dexia, I don't think you know Joshua, but he's a he's one of those guys that's sort of a bottom line guy. He's incredibly good salesperson, even though he doesn't think he is. But he's really clear about what it is that we're trying to do. He designed a business card for me that he's like, will make an impression as soon as you hand it to somebody, and it does. And the logo.
You still use business cards like I do?
Why not?
Very few people seem to.
Yeah, well, they want to slap phones and bump things and whatnot. And I'm like, just give me your card.
Right.
We don't have cards. And my card is not paper. It's a polymer, and it's thick. It actually can be used as a weapon. Comes in handy.
Well, I guess. Well, I've heard you allude. You talked a little bit about how learning sales didn't come naturally to you. My guess is it probably did more so than you're letting on. But I've heard you allude to the frustration that you felt each time during your career that you were promoted into a new sales management role, and how there just wasn't training there. And that's kind of what prompted you to start your firm. But then, as I was preparing some thoughts for this conversation, it struck me we're from a similar generation. And I thought that back when we started, every company did have sales training. I thought it was only recently that they just kind of ignored the importance of that. Do you think it's always been that way, that only a few companies have emphasized it?
I think there were ebbs and flows of sales training, but sales training, they've always focused on the individual producer and the salesperson.
Okay.
And when I've done training for a company, sales training for a company, I'm like, okay, well, where's Bob? Well, Bob's a sales manager. Okay, like he should be here. How is he going to help these guys with everything if he's not here?
Right.
And they're like, well, he's a sales manager. He should know all this.
Wow.
No, go get Bob and have him come in. By the way, I charged you for Bob to be here, so it's up to you.
But that's an interesting point. But you would include the sales manager right out of the gate with the group. I mean, I think there's a school of thought that says first we need to train the managers, because there's no point in training the group if the manager is not ready to execute. Do you ever train the sales manager first and separately?
Well, that situation I described was early on, right? When Walter was just kind of a dumb entrepreneur, right? And didn't really understand every aspect of it. What I started with was wanting to help sales managers, right? Give them coaching, help them understand how to create accountability, all of those important things. And again, dumb, didn't realize that sales managers don't have any money. They're not respected within the organization,
right?
And there's no budget.
Right.
So I had to pivot and go to the CEOs and presidents. But I think what I do now, and if I do training, it's last. And it's the absolute last thing we would do. But the coaching that I would do with the sales manager is all tied to the fundamentals of the training around the process, around the methodology that's going to be developed. So yes, but early on, that wasn't my thing. I was just, wasn't that smart.
You touched on a pet peeve of mine. You said that often the sales managers aren't respected within the organization. One of the things that drives me nuts is when I hear people within a company, CEO down through sales reps, complaining about the fact that they don't feel like they get properly respected by customers or prospects, that, they brought a lot of value, they've spent a lot of time, and they can't even get a response back. So let's put aside the question of whether that's because they didn't sell and qualify well. But let's contrast that with the way that companies then treat vendors in their organization. So the same CEO that complains about how their prospects don't give their sales team enough respect will often speak in a very condescending and derogatory way about the sales reps that are calling on them. And that hypocrisy drives me nuts.
You called it exactly what it is. It's hypocrisy, and
right.
It's because it's at the core. This is my supposition that they don't really understand and respect what salespeople do. And they don't understand that it's a slight edge business. They don't understand how hard it is to go. Like, we have to go create something every day.
Right.
You show up as an accountant or a finance person or an engineer. You've got stuff that you're supposed to do, right? And it's left over from yesterday. We got to go start something out of whole cloth. Maybe we're moving a deal forward, but we still got to go find new stuff.
Right.
So I don't think anybody. Let me rephrase. I don't think that those CEOs who have that hypocrisy, like, you got to respect everybody that are doing that, not the ones that aren't doing it well. I had a contractor at my house the other day, and I said, like, I want to buy this model, this size, and I need it installed next week. And they proceeded to do their presentation. And I'm like, time out, hold on. Like, I just told you what I wanted. You sell it. Tell me how much, and we can get going. Well, I got to do this. They literally said, I got to do this. I'm like, wow. No, dude, you don't.
Well, did they blow the deal, or did they finally?
I asked them to leave.
Well,
after offering up 3 times, could you just cut to the chase?
Well,
had to do his thing.
Well,
and I called the guy that owned the company, and it said, hey, maybe you guys could use some help.
Was he receptive?
I explained to him what happened, and he's like, well, he's doing his job. And I'm like, okay, he's not the problem.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Because that he was told that he had to do that.
Right.
And if somebody gives you a strong buying signal, test it out. Right. But let's not prolong the process if we don't have to.
Yeah. I've almost choked during 2 different conversations over the course of the last couple of weeks where I had owners or senior executives of companies tell me that they've got a big project, an initiative going on to improve their About Us deck, and another one where the big focus is to create a company culture video. And I just, I don't see a place in today's sales world with buying habits as they are and information as overwhelming as it is for people to piss away time going through some kind of an About Us deck. And I don't think I think any buyer that's forced to sit through that is going to resent it, and they're going to just view the salespeople as jamokes.
Jamokes, I like that. 100% agree. Even if it's one slide in a deck, like, we're a 50-year-old company, we're just this and this. That's the last slide.
Right.
And maybe you don't cover it.
Right.
Right. And maybe it's like, hey, by the way, we're 50 years old and we got all this stuff here. So, right. Because nobody cares.
Right.
And literally don't care.
And it just makes you sound like every other vendor out there. All right. I got a bias that I have to admit up front as I ask this question. It's embedded in this question. But I believe that people who coach on complex sales, in other words, high consideration, long sales cycle, big ticket, large buying team kinds of transactions, need a substantial amount of business acumen, including familiarity with business finance. You ran a large sign business for many years. Do you have a sense of how your business experience supports your ability to train and help sales managers view this larger context in which they need to guide their team to winning deals?
Without business acumen, without understanding how to read a P&L or an income statement. Not detailed,
Right.
but just understanding. How do you talk about ROI? How do you do, and you have a great term you call sales math. How do you do that?
Right.
If you don't understand how the numbers work, top line, bottom line, right? And all those important things in the middle. So it's not something that I teach. It's something I've thought about, partnering with somebody on to bring them in to say, here's a P&L. Here's how you look at this. What's important on this, and then how does this matter to a salesperson who's handling a complex deal? Because every one of those people, if there's three people on the committee, or there's three people that you have to sell to, who's making the decision? What do they care about? How can those other people say no?
Right.
And they all care about different things. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's time, sometimes it's risk, right? So if you don't know that this guy all he cares about is time. I don't want to waste time teaching somebody something. I don't want to relearn something. Okay, we have to address that. And the guy over here wants to just mitigate the risk. He's just afraid. Okay, we gotta put our solution in that context.
Right.
So absolutely. I mean, it's and I don't know, 6-7% of salespeople have the right amount of ability to business acumen to be able to do.
That's an interesting stat. I have no idea how we could determine that. I think it's only anecdotal, but I think you're probably right. I remember one time I led a small group learning exercise of salespeople. This was during COVID when people had a little bit more time. And so we all got, I think it was, it was kind of like a business accounting for dummies sort of thing based on a kid's lemonade stand. And it laid out balance sheet, income statement, cash flow statement, the difference between accrual and cash accounting, some of those basic fundamental things. And I think everyone appreciated it, but I don't think that any of them ever then turned around and incorporated it into any of their sales conversations.
Well, there are CEOs of businesses that don't understand cash flow, revenue, profit, right? They don't get, like, well, we made a lot of money, but I don't have any left over. Why does it feel like we're not making any money? Because they got an ass full of debt, right?
Well, and you got salespeople selling at 3% margin instead of 25% where they should be selling.
Yeah. I mean, and their comp plan isn't aligned, all that stuff. So.
Right.
But yeah, it's a valid point that, and it's something that a producer should spend some time trying to understand. And even if they just ask their customers,
right?
How do you make money here? What concerns you, right? You're gonna make that customer feel good that you're trying to understand. You can't be a complete moron, but if you dig into like what their concerns are, you will gain such insight if you actually listen to the conversation.
I'd love to see CFOs on the agenda at SKO, sales kickoffs. Pick some topic where they obviously will speak with a great deal of authority. And maybe it's, understanding how a lease can change the implications for a medium-sized business that's privately held, buying a piece of capital equipment, just something to get people thinking that way.
It needs to be related to the sales team's understanding of their customers, or understanding how they're going to explain the ROI. But it can be tangential.
Right.
And, the CEO or finance people, they should want to get in front of the salespeople and make them smarter, because they think salespeople are just idiots.
Right.
I mean, that's worse than any other.
All right. A quick ask of everyone listening and watching. If something Walter says kind of puts you back in your seat and makes you think, that means it's probably worth sharing. So when you hear that, or when you have that experience, hit the bell, drop a comment, whether you want to agree with him or argue with him. We'll respond to all the comments and be sure to share the episode. You're from Detroit. You grew up in the shadow of Henry Ford's plant. And it feels to me like there's a parallel between how the auto industry may have lost its way at one point, kind of making things for their own reasons as opposed to listening to buyers, And what's happening with many sales teams that think it's about them and their process, like that story you said, well, this is our process, I got to do this, or their products and not the buyer's outcomes. How can we help sellers shift their mindset so that the first thing they think about is how they impact their buyer's business?
Well, there's a couple of things there, I think, to unpack. First is recognizing what we alluded to, that your prospects and your customers don't care about you or your company, right?
I would argue they don't even care about your product or service.
Absolutely. They want to figure out if there's any value in having a conversation with you, right? And time, money, or risk, right? Those are the three factors. So there's that. They have to realize that. Then they have to realize that the buyer today is, even just 10 years ago, are coming in much later in the sales cycle.
Right.
And it's not just transactional stuff. It's B2B complex.
Yep.
Opportunities. They're much more informed. In the 70s, you had to go to the dealership to understand what the car was. Right. You had to go see it and get the brochure. They held all the power. You don't even need to go to a dealership anymore to buy a car. It can be done online in your pajamas.
Right.
So that translates to B2B, where they're coming in later and much more informed. So if we're not meeting them where they are and taking them on a journey that is meaningful to them, we call it, a buyer's first journey. We need to get what we need. We need to qualify them. We need to do all that. But we need to do it in the perspective of where they are in the process, understanding what it is that they're looking for, and then be able to say, we might be able to help you. Maybe we should talk about this, or I don't think I can help you.
Implicit in what you described is the fact that our value as salespeople has nothing to do with transmitting information, because there's no role left for salespeople to transmit information. The value that salespeople can create is by helping a prospect understand their business problem, quantify it, scope it, conceptualize it in a different way than they were, to help them then understand better how to achieve the outcome they're looking for.
Yes, 100%. But there's another piece that they have to be able to do, is to help that buyer see what they're doing. The status quo is our biggest competitor. Like, if we don't change, nobody's getting in big trouble, right? Unless we're losing our ass.
Right.
So we have to find a compelling reason that we can work with them on. And then we have to create that urgency, right? And we have to create that. It might be there, but we can't tell them, oh, you have to do this, otherwise this is going to happen. We have to guide them to that conclusion with questions, and illustrations, and helping them see. Because if they say it, and I learned this 40 years ago, if they say it, the prospect says it, the buyer says it, it's gospel.
Right. And when you say create it, that's not in some kind of contrived way. Really, what you're doing is helping them become aware of it. There's no way that we can create it for them.
We can't. We have to dig it out.
Right.
And we have to see if it's there. And if it's not, even if you got the best mousetrap, even if you know it's the right thing for them to do, they might be like, yeah, we don't do that. We do this.
Right.
And it's frustrating. And you could poke in three different ways, but some people are just not a fit, and you have to be able to recognize that. Because what's the most important thing in a salesperson's life? It isn't what they know. It isn't the skill set. It's our time. And if we're not leveraging our time with the right people, asking the right questions, we're not going to win.
So you mean that deal where it's not a good fit shouldn't go in your forecast and always just be next month it's going to close, next month it's going to close?
I call that hope. And hope isn't, I don't believe in
Right.
hope. I think we should be positive. But I think a positive mental attitude isn't going to get you where you want to go. Right. I mean, we need to look at things from the right perspective, right? If the glass is half empty or half full, or somebody stole my glass, right? There's all of that. But in terms of our customers, we have to really dig in, sound different, act different, be super ethical, because that's important these days. Because
Sure.
there's so much noise, so much crap going on.
Right.
It's just, it's crazy. So you got to rise above all of that.
So speaking of all the crap going on, there's a lot of stress in business. What do you use to manage stress besides kicking back with a cigar?
It's a combination of things depending upon where I'm at, what level is. This morning I woke up at 12:02, and I couldn't go back to sleep till 4:30 in the morning. Right, and I had a 7 o'clock call, so it was a yay. So what causes that? I don't know. I'm just old, I think, and it's part of the deal. So I think there's that exercise that you have to be consistent with that kind of gets your body moving and there's some energy there.
Right.
And the way I exercise is walking, but it allows me to think.
Mm-hmm.
So I can kill three birds with one stone. I can go for a walk with a cigar and think.
So you're not listening to podcasts. You're just thinking.
I'm thinking about an issue that I want to resolve, and it's usually a creative issue,
right?
Because then I'm distracted from mile 2, mile 3, right? Sometimes I'm listening to something if I really just want to free up and not do anything. I have a hard time sitting and doing nothing. It seems like it's a waste of time, and I know that's not popular. But I don't need to be doing something and working all the time. I just need to keep my mind engaged.
And where are you most engaged? Are you a morning person, evening person? When can you do your best creative work?
In an ideal situation, between 5 and 8 in the morning, that's when I write. That's when I solve those bigger problems.
Assuming you get to sleep before 4:30.
Yeah, there's that.
All right, let's do a speed round. Just give me kind of quick reactions. HR is nice people, but they absolutely can't hire super sales reps.
They have no freaking idea what they're doing as sales reps.
Only 20% of companies have a real sales process.
I think it's lower.
If reps actually stop talking about their companies, themselves, their products and services, most wouldn't know what to say. Role playing is the single most important element of sales management.
It's part of coaching, but it is the most effective tool that we have.
AI will replace sales reps because buyers would rather not talk to them.
I'm sorry, I'm just laughing at the idea.
Is that the response?
Not in a complex sale. No, I have a client that's trying to do that now, and it's failing woefully. So, transactionally, sure, but not for complex sales.
CRM exists to help management be big brother and not to help reps.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
Every company should invest in sales playbooks.
Do you throw that one in just for me?
Yeah. Well, now having said that, you got to give a little bit of context to your answer.
We had a conversation on my podcast about playbooks specifically, and we were kind of diametrically opposed, but in reality, we both think of them in the same way. We just call them different things. So if you don't have a methodology or a process to follow, then you're winging it, and you're running around wearing assless chaps.
And a playbook essentially takes those elements, the process, the methodology, the prospecting scripts and email templates and data sources and your ideal customer profile and your competitive battle cards and your sales enablement content and an understanding of the buying team and the buying journey. All that stuff gets packaged up in a playbook. So you theoretically ought to be able to hand it to a new rep who's a super salesperson, and they would be able to take off and run with it. So that's what we mean by playbook. All right, here's another one. Since buyers are 70% of the way through their buying journey before they want to talk to a rep, marketing is now more important than sales?
I think they're still equally important, but what's become most important is congruency in the messaging.
What do you mean by that?
Marketing can't say X and salespeople come in and start talking about Y.
Got it.
There has to be a bridge. There has to be that same congruency there.
If a sales rep doesn't creep you on LinkedIn before they show up for a sales interview with you, you shouldn't waste your time talking to them.
I think that's kind of specific, but I don't think you should be creeped out if they've done a little research on you.
The most insidious sales rep excuse is that the market slowed down.
I think the worst one is price. We need to lower our price.
I had a sales rep tell me one time. I was a sales manager, and the sales rep came in with a discounted deal, and I said, "Well, why'd you discount it?" Well, the word on the street is they're going to go bankrupt, and so this way we'll have a lower exposure.
He had some business acumen.
You talk a lot about accountability. You often say that companies get the behavior that they tolerate. Talk more about that.
Mediocrity, when it's accepted, it's the panacea of. You're going to kill your whole culture. So if you have 5 people on your team or 50 people on your team, and 10% of them are not performing, the good salesperson is going to know that. They're going to see what everybody else is doing. And it's not just the lack of performance, but if they're not putting in the effort, right? I think about it from a sales management perspective or as a producer. If somebody's putting in the effort and still missing the mark, we might be able to help them. The sales manager needs to coach them in a different way, find out where they're messing things up. But if they're not performing and we tolerate it, then we're part of the problem. We being the entrepreneur, the business owner, the CEO.
I love the way that Frank Slootman, who recently retired, I think he was the CEO of Snowflake, the big software company. He had this saying, "We can be very patient with performance. We're impatient with behavior." So in other words, if you're doing the stuff that we're asking you to do, we'll work with you. We'll coach you. We'll find a place for you, even if you're not in the right place. On the other hand, if you're not willing to do the work, then we're not going to waste our time with you.
And even if you're willing to do the work and you don't respond to the coaching, then maybe you should be successful someplace else.
I think you and I, people like us, are often perceived as just being kind of cantankerous old guys with some of our intolerance of excuses and our insistence on accountability. But I believe that strong performers in sales, in marketing, in any discipline appreciate coaching, and they appreciate management, and they appreciate accountability, and they largely hold themselves accountable, but they still like having structures. I don't think it's a generational thing. I think it's an individual thing. Am I wrong, or do we need to lower expectations for kind of rising generations on sales teams today?
No, we don't. We don't change standards unless you're willing to accept less, in terms of the performance. So I'll explain it this way. I have a 24-year-old daughter who I've said, you could be ruling the world here pretty quick, much faster than I did. My generation, like, we're out there killing it. They're doing whatever it took. Your generation, not that they're lazy, but they have other priorities that they need to work into things.
Right.
So if you have a great work ethic and you show up, and you try and you listen, you're going to be head and shoulders above other people.
Right.
So if you put yourself in an organization who cares about performance, if you put yourself in an organization that rewards performance, then you will grow as an individual and as a professional, and you could move up the ladder if that's what you want to do. And so I don't think we want to change that. We have to change the way we talk to the generation. So it becomes very important to understand if somebody is extrinsically, intrinsically motivated. And then we have to understand their goals. And that's really the thing that I think sales leaders get wrong, that they talk about accountability, but to what? And if we haven't set the right expectation and explain to them why this matters to the individual, then we haven't done our job. So we
For
need to
sure.
start with, this might help somebody when it comes to accountability. Find out what that rep wants. It needs to be something substantial, something tangible, something that's going to take some time, something that is probably expensive.
And it
A
may be
boat.
that nobody has ever taken them through that. So you might not only have to find out what they want, you might have to help them figure out what they want.
You will have to help them because they'll give you some dumbass thing that they want that's not clearly defined, right? So like, I want a boat. Okay. You want a tugboat? Well, no. You want a battleship? Of course not. Okay. What is it you want?
Right.
Picture yourself on the lake with the boat. What is it? And they can describe the boat. Like, okay, this guy wants to go fishing. This guy wants to go out and really enjoy with a bunch of people on the lake. So those are different boats.
Right.
So we have to get to where that is for them. Now we have something that they want. So now we can leverage that with what we need them to do, the behaviors, the activities, and the outcomes that we're looking for.
And build the sales math back from that.
You do the sales math backwards, right? Exactly. We used to call it cookbooks. We used to call it the method that we come up with the one thing that we got to do every day.
Right.
25 calls,
right.
25, whatever that is. How do I do? Because that's all I can control. Right. And if I do that, I get the boat. If I don't do it, how am I going to get the boat? And that's what the sales manager can talk about. And accountability is really simple when you dial into what it is they want, because there's like we're really selling to our salespeople as a manager, as a leader, right? It's just a little more subtle.
Right.
Like, you want the boat. How are you going to get the boat if you don't do the thing that we talked about? I mean, you're not going to make the money, right? You're barely going to be able to make the note on the house. How are you going to save the money to buy the, $500,000 boat or $30,000 boat, depending on what it is they want?
So we may be traditional in our expectations around sales and salespeople, but you're quite contemporary in your marketing. You started your podcast years ago before there were a thing. You just published your 220th episode. You've got a 5.0 rating on Apple Podcast. I asked Perplexity about it. And what Perplexity told me was that Sales and Cigars is a business-focused podcast hosted by Walter Crosby, designed for sales professionals, entrepreneurs, and growth-minded individuals who want actionable strategies to boost sales performance. The show stands out for its relaxed conversational style, often featuring Crosby and his guests enjoying a cigar and occasionally a dry rye Manhattan while discussing real-world sales challenges and solutions. Walter Crosby, the host, is known for his approachable demeanor and deep expertise in sales strategy. What prompted you to start the podcast?
You want the real story?
No, I want you to lie like a prospect. No, tell me the real story.
I was in Florida with a buddy, guy that I took sales training with 40 years ago. We were halfway through a bottle of bourbon and on our third cigar, sitting outside in Florida. And he said, we should be recording this because we're hilarious. Like, Greg, I don't think we're as funny as you think you think we are. He goes, no, we're hilarious. We should be doing this and recording it and showing it to people. Like, okay. So, dialed back a little bit on the bourbon and we sobered up, and I'm like, are you serious about the podcast thing? Because that's where it went. And he's like, yeah, we should do that. So he was a great friend, and he's done this to me lots of times. He comes up with a great idea, like whether that be finishing my basement and helping me get it started and then leaving. Right. He did that with the podcasting. Like he's never even been a guest on the podcast, but he's the reason for it. Right. He was the piece of it. It's a lot of work, as you know. It's But my criteria is really about, I need to have fun and learn something. We need to add value for the audience. Like, we got to give them value. And then for the guest, we got to give them an opportunity to sound smart or dumb, depending upon who they are.
Right.
And that's what it's morphed over the years to kind of, become what it is. But if I'm not having fun with something, then I don't want to do it, especially when it's this much work.
You often ask your guests. Sorry, go ahead.
And you work harder at it than I do. Like, you prepared for this. Like, you're asking me questions that, like, you thought about. I don't do that.
Well,
we have good conversations, but you did research. I don't do research.
Well, one of the bits of research or I guess thinking that you expect of your guests is to be prepared to respond to a question that you always ask: what book they gift to others. So, what book is meaningful enough to them, or they think is important enough that they, buy a bunch and hand them out to people. So, my turn to ask you: what book do you gift to others?
Besides mine. So, what I recommend to people or give people, there's one of two things: meditations, by Marcus Aurelius, right, the Stoic, or Michael Gerber's The E-Myth.
The what?
The E-Myth by Michael Gerber.
I've never heard of that one.
Maybe I should send you a copy. There's the latest version of it. I think it's the third revision, the E-Myth Revisited. I've heard Michael talk a couple of times. He's hilarious. He's really smart. He's got his own consulting practice. But he helps entrepreneurs understand who they are and how they fit and what they're good at and what they're not good at and why they started their business and why it's going to fail if they don't fill the gaps. And I think, especially for somebody that's an entrepreneur, like, go read this book. And if you don't learn something from it, then get out of what you're doing, because it's going to be a mess. And then if it's somebody that's just struggling with stress or just struggling with, some sort of challenges, meditations, it makes you think. Mm-hmm. And paying attention to that and realizing that we're all going to die and none of this matters. And you can sum it up with some Churchill and Mark Twain quotes about, I thought I had a lot of problems in my life, and then really they never really came to pass.
Right.
Because none of it really matters at the end of the day. But in the moment, holy crap, we're grinding our teeth on it. So,
do you ask sales candidates when you're interviewing them about what they've read recently?
The question I usually ask in one form or the other is, in the last 6 to 12 months, what have you done to invest in your professional career? And I don't care if they've read 2 books. What are the books? Right. And then they give me a name of a book, and I'm like, okay, what did you learn from that? And I get humana.
Right.
Okay. Right. Then we know that it was just, give them credit for knowing the name of a book. That's it.
Who's the best sales trainer you ever had?
A pure trainer is Jerry Weinberg.
And what made him so good?
He never gave up, coached his ass off. If you were willing to do the work, like, he never lets you off the hook. And he's still a mentor. I can call him up this afternoon and say, Jerry, like, this is what happened. He goes, what's wrong. You know what you did. Right. And he's usually right, because it's usually something I did. And I think the other one that I think has a lot of impact in a different way is Curlin. Mental toughness from him, right? People call us curmudgeons, right? I'm not for everybody. I've been equated to that sales manager. I'm not the sales manager you want. I'm the sales manager you need.
Right.
and that makes people uncomfortable. So I like to think of it as the old football coach that, used to be able to grab a player by the face mask and scream at him. But at the same time, you'd run through a brick wall for the guy.
Sure. Speaking of sales manager you need, can all sales reps be trained to be successful, or are there some that just simply can't?
They all can't be trained. I mean, you can waste money. You can put in a lot of time. But that's why I say it's the last thing that we do. Some people do sales training because, 2 days of this and we did our thing for the year.
Right.
Bullshit. You should be training the people, spending those resources on the ones that are interested and can make a difference. And if they're not willing to learn something new and try something different, then maybe they shouldn't be there. Right.
Part of growing is learning from mistakes. What's a time that somewhere in your career you made a business decision that at the time you said, oh man, this is not going to turn out well. This is a horrendous mistake, but actually in retrospect was a great decision?
Wow. Again, difficult questions. Starting this practice seemed like a great idea, and then it became, oh shit, what did I do? Right? Because you don't have a boss. You got 10 or 15, depending upon how many clients you're dancing with. Do I have the wherewithal to deal with all of these people and all the other stuff that you need to be able to do, which is what Gerber talks about in that book. So I got clients quickly, and then I had this realization: is this really what I want? And it turned out, yes, it was. But I had that doubt, right? And we talked about this the other day, and I brought this up in conversations with other people. The thing that you said, I brought it up with my daughter the other day, and it was very impactful. And I really should thank you. But do you have any sense of what it was the other day when we were talking?
I don't.
Sometimes,
and we didn't even have a half bottle of bourbon.
No, you can sound smart early in the morning without the bourbon. It's that the universe, or whatever we want to call it, challenges us. And those are the moments that we need to go through that challenge.
Right.
Because on the other side of it is really what we're looking for.
That's what Pressfield calls the resistance. When he writes in the War of Art and Turning Pro, he always comes back to this point, the resistance. And when the resistance is reaching its peak, most people will pussy out. But if you have the perspective and can recognize that the intensity of that resistance is a reflection of how close you are to some sort of a breakthrough, then it can actually become motivating.
Well, that's all true. And then when you really are in the moment, you can make decisions about, what did I learn here? Right? So if my daughter's trying to get a job with this company and she's learned like all of these things about the company. And I'm like, would you want to work for these people if they're gonna like do those kinds of things? She's like, no, I wouldn't. I'm like, well, what are we worried about?
Right.
Move on. For me, to answer your question, you reach that point like, am I gonna keep this, or you said pussy out? You get there, and it's like, I can't. That's not who I am.
Right.
And then you keep going, and you figure it out. And now I'm unemployable.
But that's okay because you're doing really well. And so that brings us to fractional sales management. The essence, I think, of what you do for many companies now, and unlike a full-time manager, I mentioned earlier, who can, they got a long runway and they can shape and mold the team and have the people they want. Instead, in contrast, you as a fractional, you parachute in, you have to make it work. I will admit, I've always thought of a sales management job as being a 60-hour-a-week thing. And so I've always been skeptical of fractionals. Convince me why I'm wrong.
Well, you're not wrong in many situations.
So how do you make it work?
Well, I have to have the right situation. And I have to get the client to understand that you think your problem is here. And yeah, you need sales management because you don't know what the hell you're doing. But that's one piece of it. You have these two other problems over here, and that has to be corrected. So you can do both, right? So what it does for me is it opens up to fix the other underlying problem.
And do you typically
And
tackle those in parallel, or does it become a sequential thing and the engagement becomes longer?
depends upon how screwed up it is. But most of the time, I can get in, and because you have to build that rapport with the team,
Right.
you have to build that. I'm going to advocate for you if you're going to do your work. If you're not going to do the work, I'm not advocating. I will do the opposite. And you got to be really straightforward and transparent, and call people out.
Mhm.
So, and you got to do that fast. And sometimes the client can help you, and sometimes the client gets in the way. I had a client one time. He's like, I got there, and he's like, I got the team in the room, conference room. Like, all right, what do you want to do? He's like, I'm just going to go in and introduce you. I'm like, terrific. So he sits at one end of the table. I sit at the other. There's 6 people sitting around the table, and he looks at him, and he's like, he's your new boss, and got up and walked away. And that's all he said. He didn't even give him my name, and he left. And I looked around the room, and they're all like got big eyes, and I'm like, man, what do you think that meant?
Well, at least you got out of your way so you could do your thing.
Yes, yes. And then other people don't.
Right.
So there's some foundational things that need to be in place that for it to work. And if I don't bring those up and hold firm on those, then the fractional deal is a waste of time. Because the fractional piece, I'm doing 2 things most of the time: accountability and coaching. And I want that CEO or that business owner to feel what good sales management looks like and feels like. I want them to feel it. And I want them to know, like, hey, this is the problem. How do you know it's a problem? Well, because of the data over here, because of this. So if they don't have some of the fundamentals in place, we got to start there. But even if it's about 60%, then I can say this is going to take longer, but here's what we're going to do. And I give them a roadmap, but I got to be in there to be able to do that.
So what's a typical engagement look like? Are you stepping in where a sales manager got fired, or is this a company that's grown organically that suddenly realizes they need somebody? Are you there for a quarter? Are you there for a year? Give me just kind of a general typical arrangement.
I need 3 to 6 month run,
Okay,
to have any real serious impact. And I need to be working towards replacing me. Right. So we're going to put the pieces in place so that when we get to the point where it's like, guys, this is where I can exit. So let's take another month or 2 and find my replacement. I'll help you do it. But now you don't have to, you can hire a sales manager who isn't, that has to invent the wheel.
right,
They're the ones that can execute.
right.
Right. Because they have to just do this process. They have to do this accountability because we're already doing it. Now we just got to get them to do it.
Is a month
So
or
then there's
two?
that.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's defining what that looks like. So, I tell them it's going to take a couple of months to find a sales manager. It might take longer. It just depends on how hard we want to get there. But then, I'm going to need to be there to get that person up to speed and train them because you don't know what you're doing to train them.
Right.
So we onboard the new sales manager and I'm out. That's my goal. But I've got one client that won't let me go.
How many clients do you typically work with at a time?
From a fractional point of view, I try to limit it to 3. And then there's other ancillary things going on that I'm doing, other things, helping people hire people and, dealing with process stuff and then coaching programs. But you're also limited to the size of the team. If you have a team that is 9, 10, 11, 12 salespeople, that becomes a little unwieldy for a fractional situation, right? So then those are really short. Like, let's get in, let me understand where the problems are. We help you get some of those fixed, but we need to immediately start looking for a salesman.
But you raise an interesting,
elevated one.
I mean, that's an interesting point about span of control, whether it's a fractional or a full-time. What do you think is a maximum reasonable span of control for a sales manager?
10 to 12 reps per sales manager, if they're good.
Wow.
If they're not really good, then you're really looking at 5 or 6 at a clip. But that sales manager needs help and support from somebody.
I'd say even if they're good, 5, 6, 7 at most. I'm amazed. We'll have to have that conversation someday about how a sales manager can really successfully run 12 people. Let's talk about micromanagement. I think that a great sales manager could often be perceived as a micromanager because the details matter. I mean, the details are critical, but there's this stigma against micromanagement. And I sometimes try to think of it differently with an analogy. Maybe if we're talking a great sales rep is actually like a professional athlete. Professional athletes have coaches and advisors for every aspect of their game, and they drill down in excruciating detail, and they mind screw it, and they watch films, and they practice, and they rehearse, and they do walkthroughs and run-throughs and all of that kind of thing. And they may not like it, but they embrace it because they know it makes them better. Where do you come down on this continuum between micromanagement and giving people latitude to do their own thing?
Well, what you were describing about the athletes, you're talking about the 1% of the 1%. Mm-hmm. The Michael Jordans, the Jerry Rice, right? Those guys worked their craft, and they worked harder than anybody else. And then they were a coach on the court and a coach in the locker room. That's not what we deal with on a regular basis in salespeople. So I like to think of it as closely managed, where we have defined expectations. There's no guesswork. You said you were going to do it. Why aren't you doing it? This happened and that, like, oh, no. You said you were going to do it. Right? Life happens. I get it. But you didn't even come close. Right? Unacceptable. So do you give people latitude? When they earn it? So when I go look at a team, like we evaluate them, we understand where their strengths and weaknesses are. And you get the one that thinks that they're the greatest because they have the biggest revenue number. And
even though they haven't cracked a new logo in the last 3 years.
Yeah. Well, this is where it goes. It's like, why do you think you're the best? Because they tell you I'm the best salespeople we got.
I've forgotten more about sales than you're ever going to know.
But you can't say that. So it's like,
no. Often they'll say that to you, won't they?
Well, you don't understand my business is the biggest one. Right. And I'm like, oh, you're not in sales? And they're like, well, I'm in sales, but you don't understand our business. Like, what's the difference? You sell the thing, they sell the thing. Yeah, okay, there's some nuance to your thing, but if you're talking about your product, you're already screwed up. Right. So I think it's getting that top salesperson in everybody's mind to realize you think you're a top salesperson because you have the most revenue. So let's explore why you have the most revenue, which goes to what you're talking about. So you get them to realize you're not opening up anything new. You're just milking this deal. You're working 20 hours a week. Okay. If that's okay with you and it's okay with the guy signing the checks, all right, it's not okay with me. Right? You're not going to get much of my time. But the person over here that's growing by 150% the last 2 years, and they're opening, there's growth, and they're grabbing share of wallet, that's who I'm gonna migrate to. I've actually kicked those people that we're talking about out of programs. Like, everything. Sheila, you have it all figured out. Yeah, you don't know what I'm doing. There's the door. Right.
Yeah, you don't need that cancer infecting everyone else.
And then you look at the rest of the crews. Like, anybody else want to go?
Right.
Because you don't come back. You don't come back in.
We're both big believers in process and systems, and you've actually recently been working on a huge initiative. You've created a sales system that in many ways parallels the popular EOS business management system that many companies follow. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm going to probably piss off people, which is sort of my thing. EOS is a great operating system for a business that's trying to scale. They have great ways to define who you are, what your vision is, to talk about your people, right? Talk about process and scorecard. It's all great. They're missing a piece for the sales organization to be able to integrate that in. This is my belief, and because I've worked with enough EOS companies running EOS, so I think the sales team is on the outside looking in because they don't really fit into this model because EOS looks inward and our customers are out there. So we got to go out. So how do we flip that to treat the salespeople within the EOS model, but talk about it differently? So if somebody's the right seat, the right person, the right seat, how do you know? It's not just, by feel. Most departments have a process and a system.
Right.
Sales departments don't have a system and process that's clearly defined, and if it is, they're not following. So we have to get that to be translated into their process part. We have to get the people part defined. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? How do they talk about it? GWC. Do they get it, want it, and kind of have the capacity for it? So we can help them understand whether that's really the case with data. So it's not that EOS is bad. It's just that it doesn't really integrate the sales organization. So
by definition, it's scoped as business management. And so in terms of operations and production and the big rocks and all that kind of stuff, the visionary and the integrator, that all makes sense. As you say, it's kind of rather inward focused as opposed to the sales. But this is a really neat idea that you have that you can overlay that kind of way of thinking about things on top of sales. And then you're speaking the same language across the organization. That's, I think, brilliant.
But you have to integrate it, and you have to be able to adjust the salespeople's the information you're gathering, how they go about it, so that it fits into the EOS model. Right. And you need to fall into the L10. You need to digest it, and it's a little bit more. Salespeople are weird. We have a different outlook. We have a different requirement. So it needs to be tweaked. And we've rolled it out with a couple of companies, sort of test it. And when somebody is open to the idea that EOS has some gaps that we can fill in and integrate, it works. If they're like, hey, we got this figured out, we know what we're doing. Okay, that's why your revenue's been flat for 3 quarters. Okay, good luck. It's just and I love the U.S. companies because they're trying to get better.
Right.
They're trying to measure. I don't care if it's EOS or strategic coach or Vistage, right? If those owners are part of a group and they're thinking and trying to get better and they're trying to get other ideas, those are my people.
Makes sense.
You're halfway to where you need to go because they already are trying to work with somebody like that.
All right, let's shift gears quickly to AI. There's a lot of talk about AI training sales reps, coaching sales reps. Is that feasible?
I wrote this the other day in my newsletter. AI is it's become a toolbox instead of a tool. It's become more diverse. So the tool is in the toolbox. You got to know which tool to use, and you have to know how to use it. Like a hammer is not going to fix everything. It feels good sometimes to beat the crap out of something, but it doesn't fix the problem. So I think there are tools there that you can use with artificial intelligence. You have to humanize it. So, there's lots of tools that will listen to calls and analyze it. There's tools that will capture information from meetings. That's all AI. I mean, AI's been around for decades.
Right.
It's just become now the social media. It's like, oh my God, it's going to take over the world. Um, it's not there yet. If we don't humanize it, I can read posts on LinkedIn. I'm sure you can. That like, oh, that was ChatGPT, and look how they use all the same language and how it doesn't really flow properly.
Right.
You can tell. But you got it's good to get you to a certain point, but you got to go humanize it, and you got to pick it for the right tool for what it is. It's not going to solve everything. It's not the solution for it.
So I think your answer is that AI for the foreseeable future will not be a satisfactory sales trainer or sales coach.
It'll be part of it. It is not the end all. You can't just give it to AI and hope for the best.
Right. I'm going to drop your website and your LinkedIn profile links in the show notes, but what's the best way for people who are interested in learning about your fractional service or buying your book or learning about your EOS system? What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
It's on Amazon.
I'll drop a link for that as well then.
If they want a free book and they ask nicely, send me an email. I might send it to them. The best way to reach out to me is through LinkedIn or the website. What I find is that people, if they follow me on LinkedIn, they're going to get a taste of who I am, which isn't for everybody, as we've established. There's one thing that I'll share the link with you if you want. I do a free weekly. It's just an email that comes out before the shit hits the fan on a Monday. And it's about something stupid that I did where I learned a lesson. And I share the lesson. I share what I did, right? Here's the idiot. And then here's what you could do to avoid this. And it takes about 3 minutes to read. It's written at a 5th grade level. So it's really quick. And the idea is that it makes you think about something. That's a great way to get some tips without getting in a wallet.
Yeah, send me that link. I'll put it in the notes along with the link to the podcast as well. All right, so wrap us up now. 3 minutes on the role of sales management and why companies should consider a fractional sales manager.
If you're thinking about hiring or moving your best salesperson to a management role, please, please, please don't. It happened to me. It was a terrible idea, but I did something that most of them don't do. I tried to figure out how to do it, right? And I eventually got better at it and better at it. So it does a couple of things. It frustrates the person, it frustrates the business owner, and it frustrates the team. So you lose that producer, all of that revenue, because they were the best. Right. You lose all that, and they go to a competitor.
Right.
So don't do that. If you've got more than one salesperson, and you're struggling to get them to do what you did as a founder, as the CEO, that you were naturally able to do, and you can't get them to do it, that's a sign that you need some help. You might not need a fractional, but you might need some help yourself to help the team. Fractional is great for net 2 to 3 to about 7 salespeople, and that's manageable for most. There are a lot of fractional people out there that are great. And there's some, it's like anything else, that they're not.
Right.
So really look under the hood.
Awesome discussion, Walter. Thank you.
It was fun.
Yeah, speaking of fun, I think you may have accidentally smiled a couple of times. We won't tell anybody. Anybody who listens to the audio won't realize it. Only those watching video. So my ask for everyone listening or watching, guests invest, material time in coming on to share their insights. So please like and share and comment on the episode, subscribe to the podcast. And thank you very much for joining me and insightful guests like Walter each week on the Industrial Growth Institute podcast.